In this video, I want to talk a little bit about energy and how it is captured in order to be used by living things. Energy and matter are the building blocks of the universe. Everything in the universe can be classified as energy or matter. Matter gives us mass and volume. It gives the three-dimensional nature of things. But the energy is needed to make that matter move. And movement is happening everywhere. We have movement happening inside of molecules and inside of atoms. They are vibrating and rotating. And there's movement inside of cells. We've talked about how things get transported through the cellular membrane. That is movement. Individual cells themselves can move. Single cell organisms move around, or in our human bodies, the immune system has cells that move, that are on patrol all around your body. And then, of course, whole organisms can move. You're very familiar with seeing organisms move. In order to get that energy, organisms have to take it out of something. They extract it from chemical bonds that are found inside of molecules. So I have sort of an illustrated molecule here, two atoms that are being held together by a chemical bond. And inside that chemical bond is chemical energy that if organisms can get a hold of that chemical energy, they can use it in order to do the movement that is necessary for life. The sun is the source of energy for life on Earth. So without the sun, we would be in pretty bad shape. The sun itself gives off light as electromagnetic radiation. That's the scientific word for light, and it actually includes invisible light like radio waves and X-rays, as well as the visible light that we know of as all the colors of the rainbow. Incidentally, it is one type of invisible light, infrared light, that is what causes objects to heat up. So the sun is not giving us heat directly because it is a burning ball of gas. It is heating us up by sending infrared light through space to Earth, which causes objects to heat up when they interact with that light. Now, all types of energies cannot be destroyed, but they can be transformed. They can be changed into a different kind of energy. And so this is important because some organisms can transform this light energy from the sun into chemical energy that is stored in molecules, and then that chemical energy is what organisms can use to power their life activities. So to back up a little bit, let's talk about why we eat. Why do we need to eat? Well, all organisms need food, and they need food to obtain two things. They need to obtain energy to power their movement, and they need food to obtain matter to build the structures of the organisms or to repair cells. So when organisms break the bond in food molecules, they're going to get both energy and matter. So food is supplying us with energy, food is supplying us with matter. It's giving the stuff that living things need to stay alive. Some organisms, again, can transform that light energy into chemical energy, and then they store it into food molecules, molecules that they themselves can use as food, as can other organisms. So photosynthesis is this process of energy capture, of transforming light energy and putting it together with carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, three very important molecules that we've heard about in talking about the biological molecules that make up living things. So photosynthesis takes light energy plus carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen and builds a molecule of glucose. That glucose molecule then becomes a food molecule, or the basis for food. Photosynthesis, in order to do this, is a chemical reaction or a series of chemical reactions. And we're going to focus on those chemical reactions happening in chloroplast, but that's not the only place photosynthesis can occur. In organisms that can do photosynthesis without chloroplast, because plants are not the only thing that are photosynthetic, these reactions will happen in different places in the organisms. Photosynthesis is a very complicated process. We're just going to focus on the summary, kind of the big picture. And the big picture is that carbon dioxide and water are put together with light energy, and it produces oxygen and a molecule of glucose. C6H12O6 is glucose. When we think about chemical reactions, there are always things going into a reaction, the inputs of a reaction or the reactants. And then there are things coming out of a reaction, the outputs or the products. When it comes to photosynthesis, there are two matter inputs plus energy and two matter outputs. Going in, of course, we have carbon dioxide gas. And that carbon dioxide gas, or CO2, is coming from the atmosphere because it has to be a gas. Another input for photosynthesis is liquid water, H2O. And this, of course, is coming from the environment, whether it's from the ground, if you're talking about a plant, or if you're talking about something that lives in water that does photosynthesis, of course, it's just being surrounded by water. And then we've already mentioned the light energy, which is coming from sunlight. Photosynthesis can work under artificial lights as well, but certainly sunlight is much more intense than any light bulb we can develop here. And then these inputs are rearranged so that they are changed into the outputs. And the two key outputs are oxygen gas, or O2 is the chemical formula for oxygen, and it is released into the atmosphere. So carbon dioxide comes in from the atmosphere, oxygen goes out into the atmosphere. And then glucose, which is where you've combined the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. You have the parts that you need. Kind of the extra oxygen goes out as oxygen gas, but then we also need oxygen to make glucose. And that is combined with the light energy. The light energy is stored in the bonds between those individual atoms that make up glucose. And glucose is stored then by the organism that's doing photosynthesis, either as sugar, so glucose itself is sugar, or as starch, because remember, starch is built from putting lots of sugars together in a long chain, or this glucose itself can be used as a foundation to build other biological molecules. So we can build amino acids from glucose. We can, by adding nitrogen, we can build lipids from glucose, because that also is just carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. We can build nucleic acids from glucose. So if you have these glucose molecules, you have the right foundation to build all the molecules that living things need. So organisms that can do photosynthesis are known as autotrophs, and that word actually means that they are self-feeding. If they're working with sunlight, they would be called photoautotrophs. That's another way of saying that, photo meaning light, but I'll probably just say autotrophs. They are also called producers, especially when we're talking about ecology and food webs, because they produce the food for all the other organisms as well. Only about 10% of our 40 million species that we have here on Earth are autotrophs, so you can see that they're pretty busy, and they are able to produce lots of food, not only for themselves, or lots of glucose for themselves, because they are able to feed everybody else. Our autotrophs include plants on land, which I think most of you are very familiar with, but in the water we have algae doing photosynthesis, and a particular type of bacteria known as blue-green bacteria is another major autotroph. So between these three types of autotrophs, even though they make up only 10% of all the species, they are producing the oxygen that we have in our air and all of the food that we're going to need to sustain the many different species here on Earth. Another key vocabulary term is heterotroph, because the organisms that depend on the autotrophs for food are called heterotrophs, which means other feeding. Heterotrophs can eat autotrophs directly to obtain the food, so we typically think of those as being herbivores, like a cow eating grass, but there are many organisms that eat autotrophs directly. Heterotrophs can also eat other heterotrophs that have eaten autotrophs. So carnivores, which are eating grass-eating animals, a lion is going after a wildebeest in the savannah, and the wildebeest is eating the grass. So you're getting the food that's been made by the autotroph kind of passing through a heterotroph and into another heterotroph. And then there are heterotrophs that eat the decaying remains of both autotrophs and heterotrophs. Our decomposers are breaking down what's ever left of the body, and again, still obtaining the chemical energy that's been stored in there between molecules. So without autotrophs, heterotrophs would have no food or oxygen, and life on Earth would cease to exist. They are extremely important. Photosynthesis is a very crucial process to keeping things alive here on Earth. And the final point I want to make is that energy flows down a one-way path through life on Earth. It always has to be coming in because the light energy from the sun is captured by photosynthesis and stored in glucose or other molecules. It can be released for use by organisms through a process known as cellular respiration, which we will get to. And if there's any energy left over after cellular respiration has released it from the chemical bonds, it's just given off as heat, and it goes out into the universe and it is gone. So energy only goes in and out. It only goes one way through life on Earth. When we talk about matter later on in this unit, we'll talk about how matter basically cycles around and around. But energy is flowing through. It's coming in from the sun, it's being used by organisms, and then it gets whatever's left over is just being given off as heat, going out into the universe and disappearing. So without the sun, we're not going to be able to sustain life. Without photosynthesis, we can't capture that sunlight. And it's a very, very important process in keeping life happening here on Earth.